Hey guys, it's Camus, and a long time ago I promised you another game in this series of games between Nigel Short and whom he thought was Bobby Fischer. It turned out to be some guy with a computer, but Nigel was convinced it was Bobby Fischer for a while and played a series of crazy games. I've already analyzed one of these before, and this is the second one. Short is white, and our fake Bobby Fischer is black. Let's get right into it. Nigel began with his favorite move, e4, e6, seemingly heading toward French defense, d4, and now the brilliant move, king to e7. I'm not sure if this opening has a name, but I think it should be called the moonwalk defense. See what you think. All right, so after king e7, Nigel just ignores and gets on with his development. Knight to c3. At this point, Rybka assesses the position as white having a substantial advantage. And you can readily believe it. And now another brilliant move from black, king to e8. Notice the subtle maneuvering, enticing white to overextend himself. Short responded knight to f3, and now a third brilliant move from black, king to e7. What's amusing to me is that if Nigel really thought he was playing Bobby Fischer, then he must have imagined that Bobby Fischer had nothing but utter disdain for the world's former #2 player to play such an opening as this. But anyway, he was convinced, as I mentioned. So after king to e7, Nigel just got on with it with bishop to c4. I mean, he's really playing all the moves that you or I would play in a similar position. Or perhaps not. Perhaps we'd be tempted to go directly after the king after this ridiculous series of opening moves. Okay, another brilliant move from black now, king to e8. And Nigel castles, c6. So finally, he decides to do something else other than moonwalk his king back and forth. So he plays c6, and he's going to try to expand with b5, perhaps d5. So d5 was played by Nigel, and fake Bobby Fischer, we'll call him Guest 71 because that's the handle he used, plays b5. And now, after bishop to b3, Rybka confidently states that white has a one game. Oh, were that so? Black plays queen to c7. It's the first piece he's moved other than the king. And now we've already reached a critical position. Assess what you would play as white in this position, because it's actually quite interesting. You'll notice that white is way ahead in development. He's castled and he has 3 pieces out. He's got good control in the center, and he's threatening to open the position against the king, who can no longer castle. Black only has 1 piece developed. And so it's not too hard to understand that there would be a very good move in this position. Unfortunately, Nigel didn't find it. He played bishop to g5, which is an okay move. It doesn't really alter the assessment of the position very much, but he had a killer move in e5, and can't blame him too much for not finding this move. As you'll see from the variations, it's kind of involved. Basically, he's threatening a killer bind here with d6, and then black will never get his pieces out. But there are some tactics involved. Okay, so as I said, we can't really blame Nigel. This is a 3-minute game with a 1-second increment. But had he played e5, c to d takes d5. Well, let's look at e takes d5 first. He's got 2 possibilities of recapture. He cannot allow d6, so pawn has to be captured. After knight to d5, attacking the queen, he's giving up a piece here. C takes d5, queen takes d5, and now we have some nasty threats against the black king. Knight to e7 is Rybka's best move. He could have tried, of course, knight to h6, but then after bishop to h6, That's not leaving him better at all. So knight to e7 was Rybka's move. Queen takes f7 check, of course. King to d8. Rook to d1. Bishop to a6, trying to get some more space for the king to escape to. e6, exploiting the pin on the d-pawn. d6. a4. h6 is a move given by Rybka, I guess because there's really no good moves for black in this position. A takes b5, bishop takes b5, and after knight to d4, it's very difficult to see how black is going to survive. White has 2 pawns for the piece and a raging attack. So let's go back. After queen to c7, e5 is the move we're looking at, and instead of e takes d5, you could look at c takes d5. Okay, and white follows up with knight takes b5, queen to b6, c4, just trying to open the position, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight to c6, he's got to get some pieces out, bishop to e3, hitting the queen, queen to b8, and now knight to d6, bishop takes d6, e takes d6, and we have something of a bind still here. Queen takes b2 is possible. Knight to d4. Now, you cannot take the knight on d4 with knight takes d4 because of bishop takes d4, and we're going to be winning that rook on h8. So instead of, after knight to d4, instead of knight takes d4, queen to b4, queen to g4 is white's response. And now he could take on d6, queen to d6, but after knight to b5, queen to f8 to guard the g-pawn, knight to c7 is simply winning for white. Again, after queen to g4, instead of queen takes d6, Rybka prefers winning the piece, queen takes c4, but this doesn't work out any better. After queen takes g7, and black is just not going to survive here. He's going to take the rook, and he's probably going to win this knight on g8 as well. Okay, so that's what Short should have done to punish black for his ridiculous play in the opening. But he didn't see any of this, and instead, after back to the game now, after bishop to b3, which I said that white was winning, queen to c7, Nigel played bishop to g5. All right, black plays h6. It's interesting, a feature of this computer, whatever computer it is, it plays a lot of pawn moves. And it reminds me, there was a gentleman in England, and I forget his name, he's got a theory, a new opening theory, where he believes that the first part of the game should be involved in making strategic pawn moves before you really get into the pieces. And, you know, perhaps there's something to his theory. I'll have to look up his name and read a little bit more about it. And the next time I analyze one of these games, I can refer to it intelligently. Anyway, after h6, bishop to h4 is a logical response. a5, now black is threatening to win this bishop. You'll notice that black still does not have any pieces developed other than his queen, whereas his white is pretty much fully developed here. So bishop to g3, in between move to make the queen move, queen to b6, and now he has to do something about the bishop, so he plays a4. b4 was the response, displacing the knight. Now Nigel plays knight to e2, but perhaps knight to b1 was a little better, which would aid in the defense of e4. He could go from b1 to d2. The problem is that on e2, he's not only not defending that pawn, but he's blocking the rook from defending the pawn, which becomes an issue later in the game. So, again, we can't really fault Nigel. I would probably have made the same move myself, not to compare myself to Nigel Short. But knight to e2, now black finally gets a piece out, knight to f6. And this piece comes out with good effect because this e-pawn comes under a lot of pressure here. So Nigel decides to liquidate in the center. D takes e6, d takes e6. I feel this really, at this point, probably just helps black because it's easier for him to develop his pieces now. Queen to d3, hanging on to the pawn. And now a very strong move from black, surprisingly strong since it's so natural, but he plays knight b to d7. And he's got his eyes on knight to c5 here, and this move is going to be very difficult for white to deal with. In anticipation of knight to c5, white plays a prophylactic move, which ends up being almost a game-losing error. He plays queen to e3, which is really inexplicable because you must have seen that the e pawn was falling. Instead, after knight b to d7, he should have played bishop to c4, bishop to a6 was Rybka's suggestion. Bishop takes a6, queen takes a6, knight e to d4, knight to c5, hitting the queen, queen to e3, knight c takes e4, knight to e5, bishop to c5, rook f to d1. And it seems to me that white is under a lot of pressure here, plus he's down a pawn. But Rybka assesses this position as being dynamically equal. So another possibility, instead of queen to c3 after knight b to d7, we've just played knight b to d7, it would be knight to d2, trying to hang on to the pawn. After bishop to a6, queen to f3, white is actually holding a small edge in this position. Kind of amazing, really. I mean, was Paul Morphy wrong? Is his development overrated? I think not, but games like this certainly make you question. So anyway, well, let's go back to the game. After knight to b to d7, he played, as I said, the mistaken move, queen to e3. And now after queen to e3, it's Rybka assesses the position as black having a serious advantage. Okay, f takes e3, knight takes e4, the e pawn falls, bishop to e5, bishop to a6, rook f to e1, defending the knight, bishop takes e2, rook takes e2, and now this bishop on e5 gets buffeted around a bit. f6, he tries bishop to c7, I guess hoping that black wouldn't play rook to c8 or rook to a7 as he did in the game. So back to f4, and I guess here he's hoping he won't play g5 or e5, but he does. So he plays e5, and here we go back to g3 where he should have probably gone in the first place. So the knight takes, h takes g3. White is down a pawn and has a pretty miserable pawn structure here. He does have some hopes if he can exchange off the rooks and the knights, he would have a bishop of opposite color ending, but it doesn't get to that. So after h takes g3, black plays knight to c5, short played bishop to c4, knight to e4, hitting that g pawn, and unfortunately he doesn't have a good defense here. Short made an error with a knight to h4. What he should have done was bishop to d3. And after knight takes g3, bishop to g6 check, king to e7, rook e to e1, f5, king to h2, king to f6, knight to h4 defending the bishop, f4, e takes f4, e takes f4. Rybka assesses this as being equal, if messy. So this was Short's last chance. So after, back to the game now, knight to e4, he played the game-losing blunder, knight to h4. And now he doesn't last long. Knight takes g3, hitting the rook, of course, rook e to e1, h5, bishop to d3. Short's really just asking for it here. I don't know, did he not see that black could play e4 here? Or maybe he did, he might have just been shell-shocked. Bishop back to c4, Now, a curious move, but Ribka likes it a lot. I guess it proves that Black was using a computer. I'm not sure I would have played this. Perhaps some of you stronger players would have considered it. As a weak player myself, I did not. He plays rook to h6, and now he's the final nail in the coffin. White's last blunder is rook a to d1, but he should have played bishop to e6, g5, knight to f5. The point of bishop to e6 is to provide an escape square for this bishop, excuse me, for the knight, and he would have saved the knight. Black is still much better, but white is alive. So instead, after rook to h6, as I said, he played the game-losing blunder, rook a to d1, and now after g5, his knight is just trapped. He could try king to h2, but after g takes h4, the knight is defended. And white is down a piece and a pawn for absolutely no compensation whatsoever. So after g5, Short resigned. Another humiliating defeat from one of the world's great players against an opening that you could not really be more questionable. And it sort of raises the question, how important are openings? It seems that the strength of the player is more important than the actual opening. Here, in the opening, Black sacrificed 4 tempi and deliberately lost castling rights for himself. And yet, yes, White did have a chance to punish him for that. But aside from that one move, Black was never really in trouble. I suppose the fact that he was in trouble for that one move in a long game, I'm sure Short would have found all of that. But I guess the moral of the story is in blitz chess, fast time limits, if you're a good player, it doesn't really matter what opening you play. You just need to have to outplay your opponent. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this. These games are actually kind of fun, and I've got a bunch more of them. So from time to time, I'll probably whip these out and see how you would have fared against ridiculous openings like the moonwalk defense. All right, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.